Okay, welcome to this session on Papa Don't Preach. So it's a session discussing patriarchy. We just had probably a little bit of an overdose because we just had a session with, two of my panelists who were talking about similar kinds of issues, but hopefully we will not overlap. This session basically will look at patriarchy and how our different authors relate to it, or how they have challenged it in their work in different ways. So I think we are sort of very uniquely placed at a time when increasingly there are these assertions of post-feminism. There are these assertions by many people, the usual thing, I'm not a feminist, but, or I am a feminist, but, equally problematic statements to me. And it's also, increasingly we are seeing, this kind of corporate feminism emerging, which is really telling us that there is no glass ceiling. You just need to lean in. You just need to sort of jump into the fray. The problem is with you. There is this sort of, we are being told by several voices that, women have arrived, and we can sort of hang up our feminist shoes. We don't really need to worry about these things anymore. But at the same time, increasingly what we are seeing all around us are terrible, violent, crude assertions of patriarchy in the most virulent forms, and constantly sort of also changing forms. So papas are preaching everywhere, not just in households, but in schools, in the judiciary. We are being told what to do, what to think, what to wear, what to eat. So the state is telling us, the bureaucracy is telling us, culture, culture vultures are telling us, censor boards are telling us what to think, how to practice our cultures. So I think, patriarchy is alive and thriving. And it is perhaps, in this peculiar situation where on the one hand we are being increasingly told that, we don't need this concept anymore. It's kind of unfashionable to talk about it, or, it's kind of passé in a way, and needless perhaps. But at the same time, we are also, in a way, seeing its assertions in newer and newer forms all the time. So I think it is in this juncture that probably we need to think about, how we place ourselves vis-a-vis the idea of patriarchy, which also has undergone several sort of theoretical changes. We don't practice sort of the conceptual, we don't use the conceptual frameworks given to us by the 1970s, the great sort of radical feminists. It's really changed quite a lot. But I think, I'd just like to sort of begin with the statement by, of course, who else but Jane Austen. In Persuasion, Anne Elliot says something very interesting. Men have had every advantage of us in telling their own story. Education has been theirs. The pen has been in their hands. So one of the ways in which patriarchy has sustained itself is by controlling the narrative. And I would like to open the conversation by saying that what counter-narratives can we offer as authors, writers, journalists, which challenges that narrative of patriarchy. So I would just like to sort of go around the panel and ask each author to address it in the ways that they think suitable. So shall we begin with you, Akhil?
One of the ways in which I think it's really interesting that you framed it as a question of changing the narrative. And one of the ways in which I have found in the last few years the most interesting conversations happening in which is how gender interacts with other social variables. And I'll start with a very small example. There's this moment where Akshay Khanna, the scholar, not the actor, they have this lovely book called Sexualness. It came out in 2016. Do check it out. In a personal conversation, they were telling me about going to a potential landlord to rent this house in Delhi. And they don't identify as male or female. They possibly identify as trans, non-binary. And so there's a phone conversation they've had, and their voice was read as a particular gender, male. And when they arrived, what they were wearing, which doesn't simply register as male or female, the landlord was sort of slightly taken aback. And what they told me was really interesting, because I thought this is a story about gender. So they violated gendered expectations of what, quote unquote, men ought to be wearing. But they said, actually, this is also a conversation about caste. The landlord is surprised that a Akshay Khanna, the landlord is surprised that a Punjabi Khatri of a particular kind, who he expects to toe the decency line, toe the respectability line, toe the gendered line in a particular manner, is not only violating the Akshay-ness part of his identity, which is maleness, but is also violating the Khanna-ness part of his identity. And I think that bit is something which increasingly has entered conversations in a very public manner, and I found that very welcome, because there is a way in which you can say that caste is already coding what kind of gender you expect other people to have. And I've often gone back to that conversation to think about, to almost break the conversation on gender and see what emerges when we break it that way. Yeah.
So thank you, Akhil, for flagging this question of intersectionality, where increasingly, you know, we look at patriarchy now not just only in terms of gender, but its intersections with other forms of oppression, be it caste, be it ethnicity, be it religion, be it community, be it sexuality. So it is a kind of intersectional lens that we are taking to patriarchy, and what we are sort of how that is changing the narrative in a very specific kind of way. So Nusrat has talked about conversions in her book, Conversions by a tribe which is sort of designated as a criminal tribe by the colonial government, and how conversions, and conversions now, of course, is a hugely political issue. So how, you know, that sort of played into, because you also talk about your family history, where, of course, there is, at the heart of it is the interfaith marriage of your parents. So your mother's conversion to Islam and the conversion of your mother's people into Christianity, I mean, both of them are very important strands in your text, and the question of caste and caste within religion. Religions that we don't associate with caste. So, you know, what does that patriarchy look like? So,
if I go back to Bhatus, that's the tribe that my great-grandparents belonged to. So Bhatus were, they were doing varied things. They were at their heart, they were nomads, but they were also street performers. They were also crafters, and in their social order, women were equal participants. So you would find women more freer in their society, which was rattling caste society, because the Hindu caste system expected, they looked at women separately with designated roles in their economic activities, whereas Bhatus and many other tribals, women were expected to bring in the money as well. So a lot of criticism, if you're reading on Bhatus works from academics, it mentions that women were looked at lasciviously, women were lustful, because their interaction with other men was also open. It wasn't parde ke piche se, yeah, you know, like, be careful, speak so much, don't laugh so much. So from that setup of women belonging to that open society to then entering Christianity was a little bit of a social, you know, shock for my ancestors as well. But interestingly, even within religion, they felt freer, because earlier men and women couldn't pray together. There would be men and then women sitting behind. And Christianity offered them this space where everybody was lined up together. And so, I mean, I liked that bit, that discovery that I made in my social ancestors' history. But coming back to your thing about my mother entering Islam and how did she perceive the changing of roles here? Yeah, I mean, I think I lost my train of thought.
Neha, you've just had one session, so speak about whatever you want to, really. But I mean, my question to you would be that, and you've spoken about this in several contexts, that Saida X is Saida X because Saida could be of any religion. But could she really be of any religion? And the kind of patriarchy that she experiences, is it in any way specific to her being not Saida X, but Saida from a Muslim community? Yeah.
So, Saida was essentially a weaver in Banaras, and she used to weave Banarsi saris. Yeah. This is the book. Yeah. So like in the earlier panel, I said that she's done 50 jobs. So, Saida essentially was a weaver in Banaras, and she used to weave Banarsi saris. Her husband was also a master weaver, but after the Babri Masjid demolition, her loom was burnt down by the PAC. And that's when she lost her source of livelihood, and this was also the time when the markets opened up, and power looms were coming in, so which meant that each power loom was displacing 30 hand looms. So this was while majoritarianism was in full force in the 90s, early 90s, and the Babri Masjid demolition and the markets opening up. So it was extremely difficult for anybody in the weaving community and in the handloom sector. Plus, additionally, because Saida was Muslim and she lived in an area which was affected by this violence, is when she had to move to Delhi. In the next 30 years, a lot of times her life essentially was of a worker working 12 to 16 hours, trying to eke out a living. But every once in a while, her life was affected because of her religious identity. And she says also that before the Babri Masjid demolition, she had experienced poverty, she had experienced all kind of deprivation, but she'd never been attacked because of her identity, because there's a lot of, like, in the weaving community in Banaras is very sort of, people coexist because they have to work together. And so it's only after the violence is when she moved here. But every once in a while she was affected. Her son, Shahzeb, so she had 3 children, Shahzeb, Salman and Reshma. Shahzeb was in love with a Hindu woman and he had to leave. And so which is why this whole propaganda theory around love jihad was sort of used against them. Salman, her other son, who was actually named after Salman Khan and wanted to be this like cool Salman Khan tough guy, but was never able to be that guy, was once in school asked in 2002, Dhakkan Salman, why did you set the train on fire? Which was actually, and Salman had no idea about which train, so he's obviously trying to be the school guy, and he said, yes, I did set it on fire, but it was actually a reference to 2002 Gujarat riots and the train incident. Or much later in 2020, she's again sort of affected by the Delhi riots. Her house was burnt down and she was once again displaced. So every once in a while, as in these so many decades, 3-4 decades, there is a rise of majoritarianism. Saida and her family's life have been affected. But at the same time, I would say that this whole, her identity is not just of a Muslim woman. Her identity is also of a worker. And as the markets are changing, as there is more and more dismissal of labor rights. For example, I keep saying this, that during COVID, the UP government suspended labor rights for 3 years. And how is this even acceptable? And it did not become a big, there was no uproar over it at a national level. The fact that while she is a Muslim woman, her identity as a worker is also always in the peril. She's always struggling. And so that is something that needs to be looked at, because if we do not marry intersection of caste, class and gender with our conversations on pluralism, they are going to be very elite conversations. So yes, she is affected. And the other thing about this I also wanted to say is that while working on this book in the last 9 years, I met a lot of trade unionists or activists or people who work on labor rights. And a lot of times, because it's the women who are doing this work, there's a lot of confusion. So they say, "Arey, ye to Mahila Samiti ka mudda hai. This is something to do with women's organization." They don't look at it as, the trade union people are not looking at this work as a question of labor, but they're looking at it again as something that women do on the side, and that also is something that one needs to look at.
Thank you, Neha. Thank you, Neha. Sandip, if you would like to sort of take up the initial question, which is of intersectionality, and address it in terms of sexuality. So, yeah, in your own work, in your novel, as well as your journalistic work. So, yeah.
Sure. I think before saying that, I was listening to what Neha was talking about Saida, and I was just thinking, I mean, the greatest sort of example of patriarchy that's been going around our social media right now is this recent statement by the chairman of Larsen and Toubro, right? Saying that why work, I want you to work Sundays because, like how long can you sit and stare at your wife? Implying that the men work and the women stay at home and there's nothing better to do than stare at your wife. I mean, so indeed, patriarchy is thriving and well. But it also begs the question, both that chairman as well as many people like us who have been going on after him and making fun of him, neither of us acknowledge the fact that actually, Saida X probably works 7 days a week. She doesn't take any days off, whether to stare at her husband or go to the movies or whatever. So those people are left out of all these conversations. But in terms of sexuality and that, I think there is Paromita, there's a thing where often, and I'm talking as a cis gay man, right, is that because of that, I feel like, okay, I'm a minority of a certain way, and in certain circles like this, there's some value to that. You're sort of cool, you can fill a certain checkbox, but which means that I, as a cis gay man, can actually sort of enjoy the best of both worlds. I can enjoy all the fruits of patriarchy and yet still say I am a bit of an outsider and a minority. As an upper caste, cis gay man, I have enormous privilege, but I can sort of put that aside and say that, oh, but I'm gay, so therefore I am. And of course, being gay comes with a lot of problems and all of that. But I think that is something we often don't deal with in terms of intersectionality, because we put forth that part of ourselves which we think is the most suitable for the conversation that's happening. And it sort of goes back to also, when Nusrat, once she has written this book, you get this idea about the complexity of that family tree. But I'm sure there were people in the family at some point or the other don't necessarily always want to talk about all the intersections and complexity. Sometimes it's easier to let the person talking to you assume what they want about you and go with that. So, that intersection is something all of us live kind of uneasily, and sometimes we embrace it, and very often we shy away from it because we live in a world that is somewhat uncomfortable with these issues of intersectionality. And in a way, though I didn't necessarily intend it to be that way, when I wrote my novel, Don't Let Him Know, at the center of it was a man who probably is gay but has married a woman. So, but I always wanted to write that story, even though people thought, oh, as a gay person, you're writing a gay novel. But for me, it was always the story of his wife. That is what I was always interested in. What does this woman, who had no choice in this matter, got married, now deal with this truth that she has stumbled upon? That was what interested me, which is why someone then said, like, oh, but you don't have a big coming out scene. And I'm like, that's true, because I was actually more interested in her discovering that the husband is gay than in the husband discovering his sexuality. And I think that is sometimes, that's when you've talked about counter narratives, I think that is the best thing we can do sometimes, is that we all operate in certain comfort zones. But sometimes, even though we can't step entirely out of the comfort zone, sometimes we can just shift a little bit to the left or the right and realize how very utterly different the world looks because you're just, you know, at a little angle to the conversation you were used to having?
Thank you, all of you. Sort of very different perspectives, but sort of coming to the central point of, you know, how do we then address the question of patriarchy. So my next question, again, to all of you is, one of the ways is, of course, producing counter-narratives and challenging the narrative of patriarchy, but how does love help or hinder our challenges to patriarchy? Because all of you have in different ways talked about love, and particularly impossible loves sometimes, you know, Akhil has. So, yeah, so what has love got to do with patriarchy?
I mean, love throws the oddball every once in a while, and I have noticed one thing over the years in conversations with several friends and in my reading, that there is a way in which love sometimes allows you great access to respectability, to being accepted within certain purviews, with being accepted within certain codes of who counts and who does not count. So, for instance, if you choose not to be in a couple, or if you do not marry, or if you do not have a child, there is a way in which you are a bit of a freak. Like you can't, and this is not necessarily about queer people alone. This could be anyone who has chosen not to be part of this grain of respectable heterosexual marriage, or the other forms of marriages as well. And there, no matter how much, I'm knocking on the door of 40 this year, and no matter how much old you get, if you haven't checked those boxes, if you haven't married, if you haven't had a child, somehow you are an anomaly. Like, chronological years might be growing, but you remain a social infant of some kind. And this constant mismatch between the social infancy and backbreaking, increasingly backbreaking work and age, seems quite strange to me. And I think, so love also comes in many different forms. You know, I was also just remarking on the Papa who seems to be preaching over here seems to be the heterosexual man. It was the only entity missing on this panel. But so many of us, I think, also looking to enter that door of respect, and there are things which keep us out. And love is one of those, whether you do it or whether you don't do it.
Yeah, so would you like to address that question, particularly in the context of your parents' marriage, perhaps, or in any other way?
So I think patriarchy functions at so many deeper levels, and it's so difficult to separate it from so many of our everyday lives. And that includes love as well, because, I mean, people get married, move into, I mean, where do you start from? So I mean, my mother got married, to a Muslim man, and she converted. And while that was not a necessity in her, in her new home, I think my father's contribution was helping her through that journey. But that was without expectations, because as my mother at one point asked her mother-in-law if she should get a new name because her name is Meera. And I think I really laud my grandmother for that, because she said, you don't need a new name, you were born with this and you're probably going to go with this name. So adopting a new name is going to help you in no way. So I think all these things happened because my parents were in love and my father was standing behind my mother and kind of in many ways with his privilege dictating the respect that she demanded in the house. But other than that, I think as a couple in love, you have to function as a unit. So when it came to sending children to schools, it was daughters go to the same kind of school that the boys go to. So I think there were lots of layers that both my parents, and I mean, both of them being feminists here, worked on together, and this is a trend that I saw, and I mentioned in the book as well, that my great-grandfather, who was the Bhatu person who converted, his wife and he were the first feminists, because, yes, Hardayal and Kalyani were the first feminists here, because they decided to send all their 7 daughters to school, and at the loss of their culture, of their personal Bhatu culture, and eventually 6 out of the 7 daughters became nurses. Again, challenging a very patriarchal, I mean, they were nurses. One of them went on to even serve in Iraq during the World War, Second World War. And this is a big breakthrough, right? In a society that still looks at nursing as a profession for lower castes, because it includes bodily fluids, and that's something that upper caste people will not touch. So they didn't pay heed to any of this. They were like, okay, somebody is ready to make our daughters give them careers, we'll take it. And all of them took it, and they excelled in their careers. So I think if I were to marry your original question, I think none of this would have happened if people were not working as units. If my grandmother was still fighting the system, then the daughters would not have been studying in the first place.
You mentioned, Neha, love jihad, and I know you have very strong opinions, as we all do. And also this whole sort of the curbing of women's agency, you know, that thinking that, you know, they are not able to make correct choices in marriage or otherwise, you know. So if you would just like to, and you just mentioned, you know, Saida's son, you know, Shehzad, who had to sort of flee, I think, you know, yeah, if you would like to talk about it.
So, various kinds of love, of course. So, one is that, because you mentioned love jihad, I think love jihad is the best example of mansplaining. Because what is love jihad? Basically, it tells you that if a woman, if you just flash a set of sunglasses, denims, bike and a nice phone in front of a woman, she will automatically fall in love with you. So totally undermining the intelligence of the woman and saying, I will tell you why she decided to like that guy. Basically, that's the theory. So here, and in the book, let me just tell you, because everybody wants us to think of things in a particular way. So Shahzeb is a bike mechanic. Of course, you know, all these John Abrahams and all your Dhoom franchise, and everybody is coming and being these cool people. And of course, as a young person, he also wants to ride a bike and wear denims and grow his hair and wear a hairband and have a phone and all that. And he falls in love with a person whose name is Bubbly, who's actually Bubbly. And Bubbly, so something happens in the book and they decide to leave. But Saida is not happy with that. She's saying, this woman has done Kala Jadoo on my son. She's done black magic. So the Hindu right wing would like to, you know, assume that everybody on the other side, this religion is very happy when this happens. But here also patriarchy exists. So patriarchy, and so which is why when this whole love jihad nonsense started, I covered a story in West UP where some Maulvi Jis had started calling it Hindu Dharm Yudh and started saying that, oh, all these Hindu boys are coming and taking our girls, right? Of course, the scale was not so big. So nobody in these various religious outfits, which are extremely deeply patriarchal, sexist, misogynist, they don't like this kind of expression of love or any, you know, exercising agency in love. The other bit also about love is that a lot of women I spoke to here in Karaval Nagar, because let me just say that we are so starved of love all the time, and as women, again, there are so many restrictions that one woman, she said that, you know, I used to really keep telling my parents that I want to go out in the evening and have ice cream, and the parents would just keep saying, no, not now, when you get married, you do it. So the first guy who came and said, oh, I'll take you on a bike and we'll go to have ice cream and Bel Puri and we'll go to India Gate and do all this, that's the first person I decided to run away with. So there is no actual understanding of love, or any people don't grow up in this country seeing any expression of romantic love in their own immediate circles. We see that in cinema or we read about it, but actually what is love we don't understand, and a lot of times we are starved so much of those small things that any basic care or any extension of hand that comes towards us, we understand that as love, and then we go forward with it, and then our life changes accordingly.
No, I just wanted to add to Love Jihad that there's also a fringe Hindutva organization in Madhya Pradesh which rewards 11,000 rupees to a Hindu boy to marry a Muslim girl called Bhagwa Love Trap. And trap, yeah. So my husband should be a recipient of that award.
Yes, Sandip, if you would just like to comment on
Well, one thing before I comment on this, when Akhil was talking about, we don't actually have sexuality as much as we have marriage status. It is about, are you single, are you married, is the actual status that we go by in terms of establishing status, normalcy and all. So it is absolutely true, because even in when I was like in my early 40s, I remember I had come back from the US, and a neighbor, was older, she saw me on the street and was very excited to see me. And she said, but you still are you're not married, and so I can pinch your cheeks. And so she stood there in the middle of the street and pinched my cheeks like I was a toddler or something. So it is true, until you're married, you're not grown up in that sense. But in terms of the love and patriarchy conversation, it just reminded me of the fact, what's been in the news lately about Oyo asking for marriage certificates to couples registering. And I saw somebody had posted something, a queer person had posted saying like, oh, sorry, heterosexuals, me and my same-sex lover are just going to be friends on a business trip and checking into the hotel while you guys need to show your marriage certificate. And I laughed, and then I thought, but look, so many of my queer friends are also, we are like right now, the court refused to hear the same-sex marriage petition, right? So, of course, we demand marriage rights. Of course, we want the same thing as everybody else. But sometimes be careful what you wish for, because you might end up, if same-sex marriage comes, there might be a time where Oyo will require a same-sex couple to also show their marriage certificate before they register, before they're allowed to enter a room. So sometimes, sometimes when we wish for rights, we are also wishing for patriarchy in ways that we don't necessarily understand. But having said that, in terms of, yes, I think love throws as Akhil said, it is the curved ball, and sometimes it smashes our notions of what is patriarchy. You find that partner who is the unit, who really gets you and understands you. But equally, at some times, you might be the most rebellious, progressive person out there, and then you, for whatever reason, fall for somebody and I've seen that with many people, cousins and stuff, who have given up careers and things because they've got married, and that was what the family expected, or whatever reason. And you should have absolutely the right to have a career or not have a career, or whatever you want to do. But sometimes it feels like, yeah, love really can mess things up, sometimes forcing us to rethink patriarchy, and sometimes letting us absorb patriarchy, because it is the easiest place to fall back on in terms of social acceptance and everything. It is a comfortable space for so many people, and you sometimes will feel like, okay, why do I keep fighting? Why do I keep pushing? Why do I keep, butting against this issue? Sometimes if I give in, it'll just be easier on everybody concerned. And including, like, as I think that example of Saida's mother is the most telling, because as sort of quote-unquote liberals telling the story, we will tell the story in another way and not count or not write about, not think of asking Saida X, what do you think about your son running away to marry this Hindu woman, right?
Okay, final question, and I would request those of you who have your books with you to read an excerpt. But before that, just a final question, which is, we've talked about patriarchy in different sort of institutional contexts, or even in sort of how it operates culturally, how it creates narratives. Now, all of us here, we are in the business of writing and documenting, and some of us are journalists, some of us are academics, some of us are both writers as well. So I was just wondering that, how does patriarchy function in the fields that we ourselves work in? How does it function, for instance, in media, which, so many of you are part of? How does it function, for instance, in academia? Because we know it does, and my God, it does. And we've just had the sort of experience of Me Too, where, of course, these myths of progressive, so-called progressive workplaces as being extremely sort of prone to harassment, extremely patriarchal, was thrown at our faces. So if you could share, some experiences or stories of, the context in which you work, and how, patriarchy operates there and what you do about it or not, So if we could change the order this time, yeah, randomly. You, Sandip, or whatever you could, yeah.
Okay, one thing is that, of course, we've spoken about sexual harassment at workplace. We know everything, so I'm not going to repeat. But I do want to say that what we definitely need to look at is how all work is changing into gig economy. And so all that infrastructure or the committees that have been instituted, their forms need to change to see how this is, if I am a freelancer, for example, if I am going out and reporting somewhere and there is an incident of sexual harassment, how will that be addressed by this internal complaints committee? So a lot of this applies to organized sector and these, and of course not the unorganized sector, which is 90% and more. But at the same time, even with more and more gig economy, it doesn't change. But the other thing which is nice is that I often use, I'll tell you the story. I'd gone a long time back in 2007, 8, 9. There were lots of these khap panchayats, which were basically clan councils and kangaroo courts in Haryana and West UP and Rajasthan, who were issuing diktats of honor killings for people who were choosing their own partners, and also for, and they, you remember those statements when they say that women who wear jeans, whatever, do chow mein or stuff like that. So basically, I had gone in Delhi convincing my editor that I want to go there and do this report. When I went to, I think it was Rewari or some place, or Rohtak, where I was speaking to a Khap Panchayat leader, and he looked at me and he said that if you were a woman from our community and roaming around with a male camera person, we would have hung you. So I was just like fresh out of college, and obviously my feminism was fully like in full blow, and I started arguing with him, and he said, I am not going to give you the interview. And I had to come back to the office and say, I don't have a story. So that actually taught me that from now on, I am going to use mansplaining to my advantage. Because most of these people I meet only think that, oh, I'm a woman, obviously I have no brains. So what do? I go to a police station and I say, sir, ये समझ नहीं आया, आप बता दीजिए, मुझे तो समझ नहीं आ रहा है. Say, अच्छा नहीं आया, come, I will show you the FIR and I will show you the charge sheet, and this is the record room. Let me explain it to you. And the same thing happens with politicians and many other people. So that's my deal now. And also because I don't get access as a woman, sometimes you don't get access to places where male reporters would. So I say, okay, this is how I'm going to do it. I'll be the bevkoof person that you think I am. As a woman, automatically you think I am, and I'm going to use it to my advantage. So that's how it works.
This book is my debut book, but I also work in Bombay as a cinematographer. And I'm also always called a woman cinematographer. So I don't know, it's very tiring. It's so tiring to all the time, I don't know, find your place on the table, as they say. It also involves making space for yourself because no one's readily giving it to you, because this is, by other people's admission, an extremely male profession. It involves heavy lifting. It involves being the head of a department which only has men, like light boys, 50, 70 light boys under you, assistants. So it is very tiring at the end of the day, but I am also very hopeful that as one of the few female cinematographers, so to speak, in Bombay, I am hopeful that, I mean, a lot of other girls have come in. So when I came to Mumbai, I didn't realize that I was taking such a big step, which was unusual for a woman, because in Jamia, I was trained by 2 female filmmakers. And for me, that was so normal that these women are working documentary filmmakers. One of them does the camera work, the other one does our theory classes. So it didn't occur to me that when I eventually go to Bombay, it will be a big thing. It will roll eyeballs when I tell them I'm interested in the camera department. So it's nice, it's so difficult. It's also working a lot beyond sometimes your capacity, because I remember I was shooting a web show once and I wanted to go and use the loo. There were no loos available for us, and there was one in a very smelly market space where all the shopkeepers and helpers must be going, and I was told by my female line producer to go and use that loo, and I told her, I can smell it from here, I'm not going. And she looked like the look they give you when they say you're a difficult cinematographer to deal with. And I shot, and after 3 hours, at some point at 2.5 hours, the actor looked at me and said, you needed to go to the loo? I said, yes, but if I go looking for a coffee shop with your production people, it's going to take a lot of time. So I did that, but now I think, why was I doing that? Who was I pleasing? I was just like troubling my bladder more than anything else. But if I would be in a similar situation now in my career, I would stop, I would go, and it takes that much time for me to go to a toilet since you didn't arrange one. So it's a battle, it's an everyday battle. Some things you learn, you start, at some point you stop fighting, and some things you give in, like you choose your battles eventually, because you are so easily labeled as difficult on the way that you don't want to close doors to conversations because people are perceiving you as difficult and not something where they can learn something from you and change.
I'll come back to this idea of being thought of as difficult, but you know, I'm an academic, I teach primarily, so one of the things which really influenced me is one of my friends, Vikramaditya Sahai. They were thinking about the crisis of the public university, as several people in this room would also know about, and I've taught in both public and private universities. And one of the things that they said, that you will always expect some charismatic teacher, and we all have someone to look up to. We all have that charismatic teacher who has changed our lives. There's always this idea of a charismatic teacher who's supposed to compensate for what otherwise is infrastructural decay of the university. And so let's say in a department, if there's a paucity of workforce, it's that teacher who's taking extra classes, it's that teacher who's spending her time with the students outside in cafes and discussing those endless subjects with them, and something that they hold a great store by, but the university is not programmatically providing it. They're relying on somehow this exceptional teacher who will do that, this charisma of the teacher. And I've noticed, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've noticed that the charismatic teachers usually have a come from far wider, diverse social locations, and they largely happen to be either cis or trans women or queer men. And as you go up the ladder, and as people start getting promotions and entering committees, and by the time you become vice chancellor in that pyramid, the social location just keeps on narrowing and narrowing and narrowing. And so the workplace is nowhere near ideal, and as the university, there's the word universe in it. It sort of reflects the universe in one sense, and I've noticed this. And at the moment they said this, that the charisma of the teacher is in compensating for the infrastructural decay. I said, yeah, but that is precisely what's happening, and it's queer folks and women folks who are stretching themselves to meet the demands of what otherwise is a very tricky space. That's one thing that I've noticed in academia.
I don't think I have very much to add here, because I work as a freelancer, basically the gig economy, but 2 quick things I'll say. One is not necessarily totally connected to patriarchy, which we were discussing, but as a, and maybe it's for another discussion, but as a freelancer, as you were talking about, you are not really plugged into a larger system. So, you know, you don't even get to ask for that cost of living increase, right? If you are a, whatever, you know, say decide and you're writing a column for X amount, you should be grateful you have a writing job and somebody is paying for you, and like, you know, nobody is going to come and say at the end of the year, oh, I think you should get an increase of X%, you know. So it is, so that as the gig economy increases is becoming the fate of more and more of us, where you're just considered to be grateful that you have a job at all. But just to complicate this idea of patriarchy and expectations, and when you were talking about being called the female cinematographer or the journalist writing on women's issues, when my book was first coming out, because it's written as short stories and it is written about Bengali families, somebody came and said, so are you like the gay Jhumpa Lahiri? And I was like, well, you know, if you want to, you know, it's my first book, if you want to compare me to this Pulitzer winner or something, I'll take it, you know, whatever patriarchy box. But this is, you know, this is how we will want to box people. And I think that's ultimately what patriarchy does, right? It puts you in a slot in that pyramid that Akhil was talking about, where the top is sort of, you'll never reach that top position if you're not the right mix. But until then, you can be the charismatic gay Jhumpa Lahiri and jump around the bottom, maybe.
Or one more thing which I've been laughing about and telling all my friends, that so at another lit fest, some person walked up to me and said, oh, your smile is so beautiful, so I bought your book. So then you realize, okay, no matter what you write, it will come to this. And then, so what is the feminist response to this? Or because the last time I got paid for journalism was in 2019, so it's only the book that I have now that needs to do well. So should I say, give the book back, you can't hold it? Or should I say, because my smile is so beautiful, buy 10 more copies? So
Okay, so if we could have some readings, Akhil, would you like to start, or maybe you start? Akhil has to look for a poem. Yeah.
As Nusrat chooses, I'm just going to read two really small poems. I'm primarily a poet and translator. This poem I really enjoy. It's from one of my favorite poets called Dorothy Parker. She wrote in New York in like 1930s, 40s, 50s. And this is a Hindi translation of a short 8-line poem called Indian Summer. The Hindi translation is, जब जवां थी तब एक आदत थी सबको खुश करना. जब जवां थी तब एक आदत थी सबको खुश करना. हर दूसरे लड़के के संग खुद को बदलना, उसके रंग में ढलना. पर अब जैसी हूँ वैसी ही हूँ, अपनी मर्जी की करती हूँ. गर ऐसे ही पसंद हूँ तो आना मेरी आड़ में, नहीं तो जरा सुनो तुम जाओ भाड़ में. And this was Dorothy Parker. The poem was Indian Summer. In youth, it was a way I had to do my best to please and change with every passing lad to suit his theories. But now I know the things I know and do the things I do. And if you do not like me, so to hell my love with you. One of my students, Tarun Thapar, who I taught in Ramjas College ages ago in Delhi University, translated this into Punjabi. जद सी जवां तद एक आदत सी सारियां नु खुश करन दी, नाल हर दूजे मुंडे दे आप नू बदलन दी, रंग ओदे विच ढलन दी. पर हुने जिवें हां ओवें ही हां अपनी मर्जी दी कर दी हां, जिवें एवें ही पसंद आ तू आजा मेरी आड़ इच, नहीं ते जरा सुनी तू खुंजे मार भाड़ इच. Khunje is mosquitoes. Yeah. And the other poem which, because I started the story about renting houses. I lived for 21 years in Delhi before I moved to another city which I deeply love, which is Bombay. This is a poem about, as I'm sure lots of us have done in different big cities, Kolkata, Bombay or Delhi, finding a house to rent. दिल्ली में घर ढूंढना. कितने लोग रहेंगे? हम सिंगल लोगों को घर नहीं देते, सिर्फ फैमिलीज को. नहीं, मकान मालिक ज्यादा रोक टोक नहीं करता, बस नॉनवेज और अल्कोहल नहीं. जैन है ना, इतना तो बनता है. अरे वो तो मुसलमानों का एरिया है, बड़ा कंजेस्टेड है, एक के ऊपर एक. आप मुस्लिम के घर रह लेंगे? देखिए, ग्राउंड फ्लोर आसानी से नहीं मिलता. यहाँ ठीक है, यहाँ सब पंजाबी हैं, पूरा वेंटिलेशन है. नहीं, बैचलर लोग न्यूसेंस करते हैं ना. नहीं, आप नहीं, वैसे बोल रहा हूँ. आप कहाँ के हैं? क्या करते हैं? नाम नहीं, पूरा नाम.
Okay, so this is, in this passage I'm referring to Prudence, who is my maternal grandmother, my nani, and Meera, who's my mother. There'll be Vasanti Das, who's the gynecologist, and so I'm reading it. By February 1947, Prudence shifted to Sitapur, the city where she had spent a good chunk of her childhood. Vasanti and Hannah lived in a government bungalow, a koti for doctors, in the nondescript city that lies north of Lucknow, which legend says was named after Lord Ram's wife Sita. It was a sprawling white bungalow with a front yard and a garden hosting colorful phlox and orange nasturtium beds in the winter. They had 2 German shepherd dogs named Pammi and Chiku. The house was an impressive colonial-style bungalow with big doorways and high ceilings that were supported by wide wooden beams. While Prudence was pampered by the hosts, John had to return to his job in Lucknow. I forgot to mention, Prudence was full-term pregnant. Sitapur was too far inland from Punjab and Bengal to feel the political turmoil. The town wore a look of serene quietness in its streets and lanes in anticipation of what lay ahead for the nation. It didn't help that there was very little clarity among the common people on what decisions were being taken by the ones in positions of power in the government. On 20th of February 1947, Britain's Prime Minister Clement Attlee made a dramatic declaration that the British intended to grant independence to India no later than June 1948. India's newly appointed Viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, announced that he would hold talks with representatives from the Congress, Muslim League, and other notable members to reconsider the partition. However, the rioting had already spread. Some of the initial instances of communal strife involved attacks by Muslim mobs on Sikhs in villages near Rawalpindi in March 1947, as well as clashes in the garrison town itself. There was turmoil in Lahore during the same period. It was still unclear at that point whether Pakistan would emerge. The question of the shape it might take was even murkier. The atmosphere of fear continued. Hindu locals apprehended a Muslim takeover in many parts of Punjab. Amidst rumors of and political opacity, both Hindus and Muslim crowds were indiscriminately setting fire on each other's properties in Amritsar and Lahore. This communal fire of hatred and insecurities would eventually engulf all of Punjab and cause the biggest migration of a population that the world has ever seen. Panna, who married a Muslim trader, lived with their sons on the outskirts of Amritsar, the city that was experiencing serious repercussions of the latest political announcements. The sisters, that's my grandmother and her sisters, the sisters were cautiously following the news for Panna's safety while simultaneously awaiting the arrival of Prudence's baby. The last few weeks of pregnancy are defined by a ponderous wait, a slowing down of time that is almost a concession for the sleepless nights that lay ahead. Nora sent a pram, and Hannah kept herself busy by knitting clothes in anticipation of the new baby. The waiting spilled into March, the month that heralds the beginning of spring with the celebration of Holi, the Hindu festival of colors. On the eve of Holi, big sacred fires are lit by North Indian communities. This ritual is called Holika Dahan. The bonfires are lit after sunset or at night, depending upon the muhurat or the auspicious time according to the traditions. Late into the night on 6th March 1947, around the time of Holika Dahan, Prudence gave birth to her first child, a thriving and healthy baby girl. It was a short but intense labor, and Prudence bore it with amazing fortitude. The child was born safely into the hands of Dr. Vasanti, the first person to hold her, and the person she'd later learn to address as Dr. Mummy. Hannah named the baby Meera after Meerabai, the most famous devotee of Lord Krishna. The jubilant staff and relatives waiting outside the labor room in the garden by the orange glow of the Holika Dahan, couldn't have been happier. Much like the fictional character Salim Sinai from Rushdie's Midnight's Children, Meera born Breach would be blessed with her own set of special powers, those of mending broken backs and healing aching muscles. And so, on that full moon night, at the cusp of India's independence, my mother, Meera, arrived into the world, legs first, almost walking into the other side, much like the land she was born into, that was burning and yet stumbling and finding its way to freedom. It was not just the bonfires of Holika Dahan that burned on the eve of Holi in 1947. Amritsar, Rawalpindi and Lahore saw devastating rioting and looting and the ugliness of communal violence. The headline of the Dawn on the next morning read, Amritsar reduced to a veritable inferno, shops looted, houses burnt, 27 killed. The telegram Hannah sent to John read, Healthy baby girl arrived, happy Holi.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah. No, not at all. Sandip also has to. Okay. Yes, exactly. Yes. I'm reading from a chapter called Doorknob. Ek aur aa gayi akash naapne. One more has arrived to measure the sky. One more woman has come to measure the immeasurable. When Saida moved to Karawal Nagar, Roopmati said this about her. A few years later, Saida repeated this for Seema, who then said the same for Khushbu. No one remembers the source of this adage, but it continues to be said for every new migrant woman who joins the workforce in Karawal Nagar. Astronomers measure the sky in degrees, minutes and seconds to confirm if a star has moved closer to the moon. The women workers of Karawal Nagar count the pieces, dozens, the kilos of things they prepare to measure how close they are to survival. Things that are necessary for a common person's survival: food, snacks, spices, cosmetics, stationery, garments, automobile parts, hardware, carpentry tools, plumbing material, building material, devotional items, festival goodies, medical supplies, electric goods, electronic goods. Everything is made and packaged here by women on a per-piece basis. Over the next few months, Saida made wooden, metal and plastic photo frames and was paid rupees 70 for 144 pieces, rupees 60 for 144 pieces of bouquets of plastic flowers, thread and needlework. I'll skip some bit of it. Over time, she put together a toolbox which she fondly called her Jadu Ka Pitara, her magic box. Reshma, her daughter, later started referring to it as her CV. The only comprehensive testament to the variety of jobs she had done for years. It was an iron trunk as big as a coffee table, her constant companion. It contained pliers, screwdrivers, wrenches of all sizes, sequins, beads, tapes and aluminium wires. Stop it.
My book is so old, I didn't bring it even. But I'll read a little bit from, so it's in the very first chapter, and in it the character Romola is a widow now, and her son has found among her papers a letter, and like an old letter, and he's giving it to her. He wordlessly handed the letter to her. The paper was almost translucent with age, but the handwriting was still clear, the ink royal blue. She recognized it with a jolt. Even though it had almost been 4 decades, she remembered exactly where she was the day she had first seen the letter. Funnily, she was in America then as well. a newly arrived bride in her neatly ordered kitchen trying to organize her spice jars until that letter arrived and turned everything upside down. The letter goes, I wanted to surprise you by telling you I had finally secured admission to graduate school in the United States. I guess the surprise ended up being mine, getting your wedding invitation. I was hoping that once we were away from the prying eyes of families, we'd be able to live the life we dreamed about during those evenings in Calcutta. Now it tastes like dust in my mouth. I feel betrayed that you couldn't be stronger. Couldn't you have waited longer? Or did you feel, since whatever we had was a secret anyway, we could just carry on as before? Hadn't we promised to be together, the world be damned? I never asked you to tell the world. I just hoped you might wait for me. Yours, Sumit. Romola sat there in Amit's armchair, slightly stunned. After all these years, how could she have been so careless? She knew she'd saved the letter, unable to destroy it. She remembered reading and rereading it, each word striking her like a sledgehammer, cracking her open over and over again. She had hidden it, stashed away like a secret pain, but she had never meant Amit to see it. This was like one of those terrible television shows she saw during the day where the wife would confess that the little girl wasn't her husband's and the studio audience would gasp in horror. Ma, said Amit, as if reaching across a great divide. Ma, tell me about Sumit uncle. Is it the same Sumit uncle who once came from America to visit? Romola stared at him shocked. No, she thought, this couldn't be happening, not now. The past, she always thought, could be wiped clean like a kitchen counter if you were careful enough. She had wanted no shadow of it to fall on Amit, to haunt his dreams. Once he had told her he never dreamed. He said he woke up every morning, his mind as clear as a cloudless summer sky. Was it her, she had wondered? Had she wiped the past clean with such determination that she had given her son only a gift of dreamlessness? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry we are out of time, so we don't really have time for questions, but maybe one quick pressing one. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for that riveting conversation. I would like to hear your 2 cents on what about the mamas who preach and the women who unwittingly sometimes uphold or perpetuate gender norms and patriarchy unawares for us in our daily lives.
This is Calcutta. All our mamas preach.
Let's just not make it mama and papa. Basically, it's patriarchy that preaches. And in that patriarchal order, whoever has power preaches. So it could be a woman and it could be a man. Yeah.
Oftentimes, many times women don't realize this, but they have so much internalized patriarchy within them. They are upholding it without really knowing that they're doing it. I mean, a very small example would be like, in our houses, it's considered virtuous, in some houses, it's considered virtuous for the women to serve the men first and hot rotis just off the tawa. And it's considered like men really like it. But it's a custom that's going on, but it's so deeply rooted in patriarchy. I mean, women feel that hungry as well, right? I mean, as a mother, I feel like eating that first roti that I have made than, you know, like going and giving it to someone. So it's just that, I mean, I'm saying that in jest now, but there are so many things that we are following in our daily lives. Even as feminists, sometimes we don't realize something we did was rooted out from a direct, expectation that patriarchy dictates.
Although as both Neha and Nusrat have said, the difference might be that when papas preach, there is a way in which power significantly accrues to them of what they are preaching. Whereas the mamas simply, when the preaching happens, simply perpetuate the status quo. So I do think they work on very different scales. So it's not that, and I mean, you have to, I mean, again, in academia, you have to look at those very few, primarily cis women, but very few cis women who have made it to senior positions, of how much of themselves they have to let go of, and how much of a kind of a corrosive hardenedness they have to inhabit by the time they reach the higher position, to know that the power is also, as the power accrues to them and as they rise the pyramid, it also undermines them. And you know, sometimes we're also reduced by that which empowers us. So it's, I mean, so I do think the preaching by the two different entities works on different scales.
Yeah, and as Neha said, that we are talking about a system of power, rather than, you know, biological sexes. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I just add one thing? It's not so much about the mama don't preach, but it's about like how much we internalize these conversations. So when the RG core thing was happening, and it's kind of like, you know, we've had this whole conversation around patriarchy and all of that, and we haven't really talked about that. But when it was happening, I had this conversation with a queer friend who had posted a meme showing, saying that the police officer who was regarded as being so ineffective and helpless should be given bangles, right? And a lot of people, and this guy, he got really angry with me for trying to explain to him why, even though we were sort of on the same side of the issue, that this was problematic. And he said, you know, I am not calling, you know, this is not about anti-women or anything. And he just didn't get it. And he was like, you know, we shouldn't talk about this. So, but I understood where he was coming from. I mean, his intention was good, but it was so ingrained, he just could not see what the problem was.
So I'm told by the organizers we have time for one more question, 1.5 questions maybe, yeah. Okay. Two, 3 questions, okay.
Hello, I'm Ishani, and
Please, you know, direct your questions to, or if it's for the whole panel, then
yeah, it's for
indicate
the whole
that.
panel. So since the panel was centered around counter narratives and how we need more of those, like the counter narratives can reach the readers only if they're published by these publishing houses, which bank on the market economy and print capitalism, which is the same economy which exploits women's labors doubly than it does of men. So how do we approach this paradox in a more ethical, political way? What's the stance?
But there are several kinds of publication platforms which operate. I mean, and different social locations have also tried to, I mean, in the previous panel, we were speaking about Khabar Leheria. If you look at the work of Panther's Paw publication, Yogesh Maitra's largely anti-caste writing that emerges from there. If you look at the kind of explosion from a diverse social locations which have used the digital as a medium, which do not rely as much on the kind of infrastructure of print, of publishing that you are speaking of, I think those are the ones to rely on. And you know, I was recalling this conversation which Neha said very eloquently in the last panel, where in UP there's this conversation during covering an election, and this person says, are you a YouTuber or a journalist? And knowing that she's not a YouTuber but a Patrakar, refuses to give an interview. So I'm just wondering what is happening on that medium. So I think rather than fold the story into kind of cynically foreclose it, perhaps look at what are the openings that are happening across these mediums, which are not as bound to or not held hostage by precisely the marketability of a particular kind of tra-la-la and marketable kind of either feminist or progressive thinking. Yeah.
Anybody? Yeah, anybody? Yeah, please.
Hello, I'm Priyanka. So the question is for the whole panel. Like, so we all know that women from lower castes faces a double marginalization. So I would like to know that if there are any stories you guys know or you guys have heard of, that what are the things they face in academics or in writing or in the field of journalism? Like, what are the challenges they face to go in a respectable position in these fields?
There is a lot of writing that exists on this, I mean, both in fiction and non-fiction. So, yeah, but anybody else would like to comment?
So I'm sorry, I can't speak from my personal experience here, but from somebody who is an award-winning journalist, to put it like that, Bhumika Saraswati. She's doing a lot of good work, and she has, in fact, spoken a lot about Dalit women not getting enough spaces in newsrooms. So, but this is, I can't speak more on this. If you want to explore more, you can go to her social medias and see. She writes and speaks a lot about that. But also something that I can advise any other Dalit women or any other marginalized people is that you can make your own spaces now, because it's opened up so much. There's a lot to explore and not rely so much on more closed spaces, especially academia, for that.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of writing around, say, I mean, if you're looking at the Bengal context, around the suicide of Chuni Kotal, and, you know, a lot of suicides of students and other academics, Dalit students and academics, have happened within the, you know, in the last 2 decades, which have been written about extensively, analyzed. So, yeah.
Just to add that there's a lot of, there is a desperate need for people in positions of power to turn back and pull one person up as well. So I would, I mean, I would expect more Dalit people to turn back and help others, because this is something as a cinematographer in Bombay, I keep one space in my personal team for a woman, because I know how difficult it is for women to get that one slot. And after they survive one project, it's on their performance, of course, if they'll stay with me or another one gets a chance. But this is something I think that needs to be done within the community.
Yeah, Neha, your comment about somebody who said he'll buy your book because you have a beautiful smile. It reminded me of, you know, in the early 80s in Australia, you had a anarchist group called Billboard Users Graffiti Against Unethical Promotions. So there was an advertisement of a car, beautiful, sleek car, and the caption was, "If this car were a woman, you'd pinch her bum." So the graffiti was, if this woman was a car, she would run you over.
So yeah, as Akhil says, on that note, probably we should close this session. Thank you so much for your questions. And thank you, panelists, for a really interesting discussion. Thank you.